Where can you find 6,000 local businesses with just one click? EverythingMidmo.com.
Hello and welcome to the Columbia Daily Tribune's Behind the Stripes webcast, Nebraska Week edition. Dave, Nebraska Week began a little early for the Missouri coaching staff. Friday, Coach Pinkel arrives at Tyler Gabbert's Parkway West High School game. Tyler Gabbert, the younger brother of Blaine Gabbert, Missouri's quarterback, shows up in a helicopter.
Yeah.
Now there's a bit of talk about, well, Missouri, are they trying to get Tyler Gabbert, the younger brother of Blaine, who is now committed to Nebraska?
Right. Well, a little flashy for Pinkel's taste, I think. But they did use the helicopter to go to about 4 different games in the area. I guess it was practical for he and Cornell Ford to get around town that way. But yeah, they definitely showing some interest in Tyler Gabbert, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Missouri lost a quarterback at the beginning of the season, Blaine Dalton. They have an opening right now. Still have 2 commitments for down the road for 2010 and 2011, but I think they'd like to add one more, obviously. And with Tyler Gabbert, I think his situation always was looking at the depth charts, and he felt he has a good situation at Nebraska, and he's gone on the record saying he's still committed to Nebraska. But I think he's maybe considering Missouri a little bit more now that the depth chart there has changed, and since his brother's having such great success early on, at least. So he's exposed to Missouri staff and to their program a lot. So I think the jury's still out on where he'll end up.
I think in the animal kingdom this would be called marking your territory. I think with Gary Pinkel it's like, this is my state. If I want this player, I'm going to go show you I can go get him. So it'll be interesting to see if we see a redux of the Blaine Gabbert situation where he was initially committed to Nebraska, then switched.
Sure.
This kind of ties in with what I think has kind of been a growing trend in the 2000s, in that Nebraska-Missouri game is kind of becoming not as big as Missouri-Kansas to Missouri fans, but definitely the second biggest. Why do you think the rivalry part of it has grown throughout that time?
I think a lot of it has to do with the 2 fan bases. I mean, this is 2 groups of fans that are coming from very different backgrounds as far as following their teams over the last 20 years, even 10 years. I think some Nebraska fans, at least a fringe of them, see Missouri as an up-and-coming program. They don't want to admit that their run is over, that they still think it's the mid-'90s, and they want to, still see their team as the dominant one, at least in the Big 12 North. And I think there's maybe a fringe of Missouri fans who are ready to write off Nebraska completely, and to think it's Missouri's time and it's their time to dominate. But you get those 2 kind of warring factions together, and with the internet and with the way that fans can interact so much now, that just seems to be a real hostile rivalry with the fans. Maybe not as much with the players and the coaches, although I think under the surface, that there's a real rivalry going on between the 2. Not so much the staffs, but just the programs and recruiting battles and the games. There's been a lot said before and after the games the last couple of years. So I think it's good. It's good for us. It just makes a really interesting game every year. And so I think it's close to Kansas. And there's some years where Kansas-Missouri doesn't really generate a lot of excitement outside of this area. But Missouri-Nebraska is getting to the point where it's becoming kind of a little more national relevant rivalry.
Yeah, I think it's almost the little brother syndrome where Missouri for 24 straight years was getting wedgies from Nebraska, and now suddenly, well, I can hold my own with this team, and it seems kind of fun, and now it's going back and forth a little bit.
Right.
But I think a lot of it boils down to recruiting, because I think really Missouri, probably just from a resources standpoint, probably is the biggest competition that Nebraska has in the Big 12 North. Certainly for players, it is.
Sure.
They're positioned best to get the best recruits. And Nebraska's had a pretty good time coming into Missouri, getting the guys they wanted, going back, the Wistroms, Mike Rucker, Steve Warren, etc. Now you see Missouri not only keeping some of those guys, but then taking guys who are committed to Nebraska, flipping them. I think that's where maybe even amongst the staffs, this is a bigger deal than any other game other than Kansas on their schedule.
Right.
Looking at this game in particular on Thursday, what kind of game does it have to be for either team to win?
Well, I think after watching Missouri's game at Nevada, and I'd be careful before comparing games from non-conference part of the season to what's going to happen the rest of the way, especially with this game. But Missouri wasn't the more physical team at Nevada, and I think that's Nebraska's one advantage, or at least their perceived advantage, that they can win the battle in the trenches, and I think that could go a long way towards them winning this game Thursday night. So Missouri, I think, has to be a lot tougher team, both on the offensive line, setting up the run and protecting Blaine Gabbert, and against the run on defense too, because Nebraska, it's not a mystery what they like to do on offense. They like to run the ball with Roy Alu and get it between the tackles there. And Missouri wasn't very good in that department at Nevada. So Missouri kind of has to play a little differently than they did in their last game. And I think they will. I think the emotion of this game, what the atmosphere is going to be like, the rivalry that we talked about, I think you'll see a more physical Missouri team. But I think everything in this game is going to start down there on the lines in the trenches.
Defensively, Missouri has been okay against the run up until that Nevada game, though. So I think you could at least think maybe that's an aberration. Now, running the ball on offense, Missouri has not been very good all year. There probably is your main concern if you're a Missouri fan.
Right, and if they don't get that fixed in this game, I think you can live without it. If you're a Missouri offense, I don't think you need to have a really potent running attack, but you better be good on the pass. And Gabbert, I think, will have to make good decisions. He's going to need to be protected. And if they can make big plays in the passing game, like they have historically against Nebraska these last couple of years, when Chase Daniel was the quarterback, I think Missouri can win. And that's going to be the key to getting some big plays, because you worry if Missouri is going to be able to run the ball and be good in short yardage red zone situations.
The other factor that becoming more and more likely, I guess, is that the weather could come into play here. They're talking about storms that night, and you would think at least that might favor Nebraska team that's more willing and able to run the ball. Yeah,
and Gary Pinkel's talked about this a lot, that they had a downpour game against Kansas State here at home a couple years ago where Missouri threw for almost 400 yards. So the throwing the ball in the rain isn't that big of a problem. I think it's more of the wind. If it's a really windy night, it might be hard to dial up some of those deep passes that Gabbert's shown that he can do pretty well. So I think the wind might be more of a concern, but the rain, you would think, would also favor Nebraska's running game, and it could totally take out Missouri's running game. Not that they've had much of one as of late.
And if it's a complete deluge, it could also take out some of the fans. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
I think that's going to be a geared up fan base for that game. And if it's, obviously if it's just pouring down rain, it'll either quiet them or drive some away too.
Sure.
So that could come into play. Lastly, last year, leading up to the Missouri game, I know one of the Nebraska assistants was quoted as saying they had a little something special cooked up for Missouri. Missouri scored 52 points on them, and a lot of what we saw last year from Nebraska is what we've seen some teams try to do during the Chase Daniel era, which was just rush three and drop everybody else back, and it never seemed to work. What do you think you'll see from them this year?
Well, they're talking again that they have a plan ready, that they're going to change things up a little bit. Now, we'll see what that is for sure. Will Compton, linebacker from the state of Missouri, who was in that same recruiting class as Blaine Gabbert, he talked yesterday and told reporters that they have a dime package installed, 6 defensive backs. He's the one linebacker in that group, and I don't know if he was just laying that out there for people to read or if that's just really the truth. I would suspect that he's just telling the truth, and that's what they have planned. So it'll be interesting to see if Missouri, if they go up against a defense that has 6 defensive backs back there in the secondary to slow down the passing game, if they take advantage of it with the run, if they can take advantage of it with the run. You figure if they're only have 5 up front to attack Missouri's running game, can they make the most of it and get some big runs with Derek Washington, like they did a year ago against Nebraska, like they've done against some other opponents the last couple of years that have been more concerned about the passing game. So it'll be interesting to see how that chess match unfolds. I think if you're Missouri, you got to be ready for everything. Because there's so many different ways you can approach Missouri spread offense.
Okay, well, we'll see how that turns out. Next Wednesday, we'll talk about this game, and then look forward to Missouri's trip down to Oklahoma State the following Saturday.